Hi, welcome back. Alright, I want to show you something that I was going to do and I've changed. So Frick, if you can get close on this. This is the sample one that I was doing before. And some of you may have seen me do this in the videos where I use a skew block plane to go in and cut a little shallow rabbet right on the end of the board. Now the reason we do this is when it comes time to reference the two in the layout, that little rabbet holds it perfectly in place and there's no guesswork. The problem is that if we cut that rabbet now, when we finish the box and we have our sliding lid, we're going to see it right here at the top. And I've yet to be able to figure out a way to hide it. I could easily cut one of these by stopping right here, but the problem is that when you cut the other one, you've got to cross that piece. So it's just not going to work, so we'll do it the old-fashioned way without the rabbet. We went ahead and laid out these two on the last episode, so now we've got to go in and lay out the opposite end, and then we'll go ahead and get cutting. So one of these I went ahead and cut a groove on. Okay, here we are right here. Frick, if you want to come in on this. So what we're going to do, we're going to take this end piece and we've got to cut it down. It's only going to be from the bottom of the box up to the bottom of the groove. Don't have to worry about that right now, but take that into consideration when we lay it out. We've already used our marking gauge to score these pieces where we're going to cut off in the ends. So I'm going to go ahead and lay that out. So Frick, if you want to come in behind me, you'll be able to see this better. Okay, we're using a 1:6 ratio or a softwood setting of 10 degrees. Need the dividers and red pen. As I said before, red's just easier to see. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is identify where this end is going to be. You might want to come over on the other side of me. It's easier to see. Alright, so this is going to be the top. Now we'll take this, I'm over here, and I'm going to take the half pin setting off of the one we did before. Okay, and we'll lay that out, referencing off of the bottom, and then referencing off of there. And just to make it a little easier to follow along, I'll go ahead and lay that out top and bottom. I'll use my dovetail marker for the rest of it. So come down here on the face, using that 1:6 ratio from the scribe line up, and over here from the scribe line up. Okay, now we got to think this thing through. I just realized this is going to be a little bit shorter. In fact, we need to go in now and cut that off. Remember, when we put this together, because this is going to be a half blind, this part of the tail has to come out flush with the end of the board, the end of the end. So we want these pins to be the same width here as they're going to be up here. So I've got to get rid of this piece off the end of the board first. So let's chop that off. And I want that chisel to be extremely sharp when I do that. So let's just take a second and put a new edge on that. I'm using the 1000 and the 16,000. I'll just use a lapping plate to bring these back into being flat. If you have these, remember to keep that lapping plate clean. If you don't, the slurry dries, fills those grooves, and really slows down its ability to cut. Okay, set that on the primary bevel, raise up a few degrees. Shouldn't take very long. Just want to raise a burr on the back side. Yeah, I could go a little bit more than that. Sometimes easier just to go forward and back instead of circles, especially on the narrow chisels, because it has a real tendency to dig in. May soon be time for a new primary bevel. When that secondary bevel, you can't see it, I'll wipe this off. When the secondary bevel gets too long, you're just having to work too much metal each time you sharpen. So it's easier to go in and shorten it by creating a new primary. Come over here, raise up a few degrees higher. Flip it over. Get rid of the burr. Okay, I have a good close look at that. All right, let's try that out. I'm going to examine that real closely and make sure that I got up high enough on that tertiary bevel. I think I did. Okay, I want a backing board before I chop. And I want to keep this, I want this cut to be really clean on the end to make the layout easier. Okay. This one we already have identified. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and saw that right now. Make sure that's standing plumb. But just so you know what I'm doing, I'm going to come in and I'm going to saw this side of where the groove is going to be. Which means I want to keep that red line on, and I want to cut down to that scribe line. You may notice I switched saws. This is one of my other dovetail saws, but I've removed a lot of the set on this one. So when you're dealing with little wee thin pieces like this, sometimes it works a little bit better to have as little set as possible. Okay. Now I'll start on the inside. I'm going to, that's a fairly heavy chop, and there's a lot of pressure. In fact, I'm wondering if I should cut that off. Yeah, I think I will. I'm going to cut that off with the crosscut saw. Or at least as much of it as I can. It's a little too much to chisel. There's a lot of pressure. A lot of pressure on the bevel of the chisel when you have all that excess waste out there, and it wants to drive the chisel behind your scribe line. And that looks terrible. So we'll get rid of as much of this as we can. I wonder if we can get the lamp set up. I can't see that very well. Jay, can you get me a lamp set up running off one of these holes in the back of the bench? Can you see better over here, Frick, on this side? Over my left shoulder?
I can see okay.
I'm being careful to leave the line. Didn't have the depth to be able to do that. Oh, somebody chewed up my bench. Excuse me, I'm going to grab the fret saw. Okay. What I attempt to do is come down here and just stay right on top of that line. Okay, over here on the back side, there you go. Could have done that the whole way. Okay, I'm going to start on the inside. Keep the chisel plumb. There's some light around here. Gotta love the way that Northern white pine cuts. Now, see right here? Right here where my pencil is. I've got a lot of excess material here. Now on this pine it might not make a big difference, but on hardwood it would definitely, that much material in the waste would definitely push the chisel behind the scribe line. So to prevent it, what you can do is come in and just take a little chop like that just backs some of it off. Then when you set the chisel in there, you don't have as much pressure. It allows the chisel to get down into the wood a little bit, where it then has some good support before it starts to build up from all that excess waste. Okay, flip this over and finish it from the face side. Now, here on the end, you got to be particularly careful, because when the joint, no, actually that's being cut off, so I'm okay. I'm okay. Now that was pretty clean, considering how soft. Look right here on the end grain. Pretty clean, considering how soft that wood is. Because a lot of times you'll have massive failure in here, and it only becomes a problem when it gets close to the edge, and then you start planing the finished joint, and you end up with a translucent area as a result of it. One of the things you can do is only chop about 1/3 of a way starting on the inside, and then do the 2/3 starting on the face side. Then that failure happens closer to the middle as opposed to out here. I'll see if I can't do that a little differently on the next piece. Alright, let's just make sure we're doing this, looking at this properly. Alright, now we're going to do the same thing over here. I didn't mark that one. I'm going to reference off of the top, so we better, meaning the that 1/4 inch drawer bottom plane is going to reference off the top. So if I'm going to line up these two, I got to reference off of the top of them as opposed to on the bottom, just in case there's any discrepancy whatsoever. All right, let's just trace these same lines. Get rid of that. Okay, we'll go ahead and make this cut. Which saw am I using? Okay. A lot of folks have a hard time with this fret saw. Just spend a little bit of time practicing with it so you know how it behaves. When I installed the blade on this one, I twisted about 30 degrees at the top and at the bottom. So when you're making a horizontal cut like this, you're not restricted by the depth of the throat. See how the frame stays up above the end of the board. Of course, if you're left-handed, you're just going to twist it the opposite way. I use a 12.5 teeth per inch, 5-inch long scroll saw blade that's got a skip tooth configuration. And that just simply means, I'll show you, that means that where there would normally be another tooth, there's just a bigger gullet or a wider space, which allows for the saw to cut faster because the sawdust has more room to go. When the gullet fills up, the tooth doesn't cut anymore. So if you eliminate a tooth, it's a little coarser cut, but it's a lot faster. All right, let's chop this one out. Now, come on over and I'll show you how I'm going to do this different. And this is going to have various applications. So you're going to want to do this technique whenever you're dealing with these types of woods. What I'm going to do is I'm going to chop down just about 1/3 of the distance on the inside, but I'm going to first do as I said earlier, just remove some of that excess material so we don't have so much pressure pushing the chisel bevel. Now set that in the marking gauge line. Can you see from there, Frick?
Yeah.
But don't go down as far as I did last time. Okay, well, yeah, it's a little more than a third. Let's see if it helps. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. It's not worth risking, so I'm going to just back off that extra material. Yeah, see what that did? This being the surface, I got lots of good solid material there, and it didn't start to break until it got close to the middle instead of being out near the surface. Okay, make sure that end is choking up on the chisel so it's safer to use. Make sure that end is nice and clean. Alright, now we can go ahead and lay that out. I don't know what happened to my bench, but that's... Just want to double check this. That's not the one I used. Make sure I'm exactly the same. Okay. Now come in here, and then in from this side. Jake, did you find me the worst lamp you could? That's going to put the mark off a little bit. That won't matter. I can make adjustments to that when I come to sawing. But all right, 3 tails. I want to have the same spacing. I want to have the same spacing, even though the tails are going to be a little bit smaller, because we've got 3 tails over this area. Now we're going to have 3 tails over a smaller area. So I want to have the same pin spacing. I'll just make the adjustment in the actual width of the tail. And that's the nice thing about this method of laying out dovetails. You can have drawers stacked different widths, and just by adjusting the tail, as long as you keep the pins the same size, everything looks nice and symmetrical. So starting on there, step 1, 2, a little more than that. Remember too that when you make these, when you're adjusting this to determine the width of your pin, whatever you open the dividers gets multiplied by the number of times you step. Now, have I got another pair of dividers around? I don't want to change that setting if I can avoid it. Where are they? Okay, I'm going to take this setting. Put there. Actually, that's not a very good pair of dividers. Take that setting, do this again. That's just right. So now I'll go ahead and leave a mark, and then come back the other way. Okay, 1 6. Square line across the end. Come up the face. Now, figure out a way to mark this one, because I'm not going to be able to move the gauge all the way over. There. Okay, identify my waist. Now, it's just as easy, because the pieces are identical, is just to simply lay them against each other and transfer these lines. You need to be over my other shoulder?
Yeah.
Come back this way. Okay, mark the waist on this one. Run that reference line down the face. Alright, before I cut this, let's just set this up and make sure everything is correct. Okay, where's my end pieces? 1 and 2, 3 and 4. Okay. So these are ready to saw. Put that pin in there and cut that piece down to just the height of below the groove. Allows this top to slide over top of it. Okay, that's good. Alright, let's saw them. Get that one out of the way. Now, I often get asked about the advantage of cutting tails first, that you can gang saw, meaning you can put two of them together. And that's alright for maybe cabinet work, but if you're building furniture, I find if you do that, it's too hard, or it's too easy to end up cutting a little bit too low on the back side. So you run the risk of spoiling your joint. So I actually take a little bit longer, but I do them one at a time. Alright, want that standing plumb. Come in here, grab the right saw. That's why I typically use the white dovetail saw and the black handled crosscut saw. Keep you from grabbing the wrong one. Come in here, keep that line perfectly square across the end, that cut I mean. Right to the baseline, but stop at the baseline. Don't go below, don't stop above. Try to get the angles on, but if you're off a little bit, it's not that big of a deal. At least not from a the perspective of how it's going to go together. Get them off too much, it may not look all that great, but all right, now that's in the right spot. I'm going to go ahead and finish that cut. Alright, so I do all of one side before I turn, do the other side. That means I'll have to move my lamp once. Move my thumb out of the way because I need to see the line. Use my finger as an anchor point. Press the saw. Always lateral pressure against my fingertip with the saw. That prevents the saw from skirting one way or the other. Gives me a lot of control where that saw is going to start. And I'm using that. My saw has these little tiny teeth up front so that you can easily start the kerf. Then bigger teeth back here to speed it up. And you'll notice that the whole time I'm sawing, I'm constantly stopping to blow the sawdust out of the way. Makes it hard to talk and saw, but I want to be able to see that line, especially on this, with this pine where there's so much pitch. Sawdust that it has a tendency to stick like glue. Okay. These small dovetails are actually harder to do than the bigger ones, just because it's so close and such close work. And the pine, you have to be so careful. It will not tolerate any misuse at all. And it cuts so fast, you can just zip right by your line before you know it. All right, I'm going to flip it over and do the other end. Okay, well, we've got the lamp set this way. We'll cut these. When I put my saw into position, I see. I want you to come over here, Frick. Look over my left shoulder. They need to see this. Look over my left shoulder. My other left shoulder. Okay, when I put this into position, I want you to make sure they see this. You see the line? When I put it into position, I see all of the line. I don't want to see any wood and then the line. I don't want to obscure any of the line. So I make sure that cut is parallel. I see just ink, and I want to preserve ink. After the cut. So see what's left? Just ink. Very, very light touch on the saw. Let the saw do what it's supposed to do, and it'll cut perfectly straight as long as you aim it. If you squeeze too tight, you're going to overpower it, and it's not going to give you a nice clean kerf. Okay, go back over on my other right shoulder. We'll show you this one too. This is my strong side of sawing. I get to pinch with both fingers. Put the lamp over here so you can see a little better. Press the saw firmly against them. Push the saw with my fingers back into position. See, all I can see is ink. I'm just barely holding this saw, so it'll do what it needs to do. Wipe the dust. Right down to the line. It's a little hard to see because I don't want to have those gauge lines on after the fact, so I made it fairly light when I did it. And when you put the fret saw down, you've got to remember, because of that twist in the blade, you've got to drop the frame over a little bit. Drop to the bottom, come up off of the bottom. Now this is where some folks have a hard time, because as they start to saw, the blade moves up and down. So if you just turn it a little bit so it kind of locks it in the kerf. Drop to the bottom, come up. A little something else you can do too. You can take a pencil and get your plane right here and just cut a chamfer on the, or a chisel tip, sorry is what I meant to say. Rather expensive pencil sharpener, wouldn't you say? Cut a chisel tip in there, and then you could come in and set that in that scribe line, and the chisel tip will hold it in place. And now you can see that line a little bit better. You're going to plane that off anyway, but it makes it a lot easier to work with. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and saw off these ends. How are we doing for time, guys?
You got 10 seconds.
All of 10 seconds. Well, let's get this cut. I'm going to come in here, and this is the part that I'm going to cut off It's going to hold the half pin. So I want to make sure I do not go on the other side of that line. So I'll sneak up, get as close as I can, splitting that line. Careful at the bottom. Don't want to slam into the side of that pin. Just allow me a couple seconds to get this one finished as well. Eyeball that so that it's level. Then my ability to cut plumb is constantly being reinforced every time I saw something. If I didn't already say it, one of the second most important thing you have to be able to do with a dovetail saw is make a plumb cut. We'll talk about that as we start cutting the pins for this. Alright, we've got a little bit of work to do with the chisel. Clean those up, get the other ones cut, and then we can go ahead and move on to the pin boards. So, we'll see you back here for episode number
7.
7. I need help.